Yes, welcome to another great episode of the Ashish and Friends podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Cowboys. This is a half QB carousel and half Cowboys episode right here. But
Yeah.
we had three big news happen last week. We're unfortunately out and couldn't record about it. But let's get started with the biggest news, which is Dak Prescott getting signed to an extension, 4 years, 160 million. Dev, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So my first thought, I saw this contract and I was like, oh, that's an overpay, right? That's like the immediate thought because you're like 40 million a year. You look at it and you're like, that's a lot for Dak
Yeah,
Prescott, right? And
right.
and we both think he's a top 10 easily quarterback in the league. We think he's in that conversation, pushing that top five at his best, right? Like
Yeah,
he's getting into that conversation. But 40 million is a lot. Like you're talking about just how much it cripples. You saw with Russell Wilson, you see with like even Deshaun Watson's contract coming up, right? How much that's going to start crippling teams. It's hard, and he's getting paid a lot of money. But when I looked at the contract details, it's actually a lot better than I thought. First of all, this year they were going to have to pay him 31. They actually created a ton of cap room for this year in the down year by signing this contract with the two voidable years too. They gave him that huge signing bonus and they spread it out over those two extra voidable years, right? And
yeah.
so it actually makes a contract that's kind of team friendly in a lot of ways. So it's interesting for how much they're
No,
paying
no.
him. They did a great job with the contract.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a new thing. We're just hearing all these NFL teams adding these voided, years at the end just to I was just like, what? Why
Yeah.
have we not been doing this in the past? This is
Well,
fantastic.
Philly like super started it in 2016 when they added like a ton of this to get that like the 2016, 17, 18, like they only obviously ended up winning the one Super Bowl, but those were like super teams.
Yeah.
Like they were just stacked across the board because they just had a bunch of players on voidable years. Like
Right. Right, right. And I mean, okay, everyone's thoughts probably, around the league, it's just like, okay, you kind of think the same quarterbacks in the same year, right?
yeah.
Carson Wentz, they paid him a couple years ago, had to move on from him. Jared Goff got paid, moved on from him, right? But
Mm.
first of all, Dak was a fourth round pick. He was the most underpaid quarterback and producing so much more than what his contract was,
Yeah,
right? So
best value contract in the NFL for 4 years.
yeah, easily. And I just felt so bad because the injury happened last year, but I deserves this money. It's just funny, 2 years ago we're like, nah, he's not worth 33, 35 million, and we ended up having to pay 40 million. But,
Yeah.
I think, you had to do it. We kind of talked about this in the past. I was like, there's only two ways to go about this, right? You either franchise him, and that would have actually been like 37.7 million, right? And
That's and a
for this
lot
year,
in the down cap year.
that is, yeah, that was a lot, and it ended up being 22 point something. That's what it's gonna be worth. So 15 million of cap space right there. Um, so I was just saying, yeah, you got to get done, and either you franchise him for the year and you trade him, right? You had to trade him because what's the point of having him for 1 year and then then he's a free agent? You can't even trade him. You get no assets back, or you get a long term deal done, and that's what they did. So I'm cool with it. At least this headache's out of the way. It's been annoying for the past few years.
Right.
Are you gonna sign Dak? How much is he worth? It's done. Let's move forward.
It,
Let's go win a Super Bowl.
yeah, it's that story that hasn't gone away for 3 years. Because really, in 2018, he was eligible to sign his extension. Then
Yeah.
they probably could have signed him for 30 mil a year. Then, right?
Right.
2019 comes around. That's the year Goff and Wentz sign, and everyone's saying you got to get it done before those. Then they franchise him. We think it's going to happen next last year. Finally, this year, I actually was fairly certain it wasn't going to happen until maybe I heard like on Sunday before they signed him on Monday, right? The deadline to do it was Tuesday,
Right.
and on Sunday I started seeing like Jane Slater had reported and some other reporters that like they're talking, right? Like
Yeah.
something's going on, right? And it had been reported that Dak had been working out in the facility all summer, which he didn't do last year, right? And that's
Right.
that's always a good sign that like you're on good enough terms to be working out in the practice facility and rehabbing with the Dallas doctors.
Yeah, that's totally true. And like that's the issue when you keep waiting to pay someone. Like the market keeps changing, right? Then because we were competing with Goff and Wentz a couple of years ago. We're like, is he worth it? Is he better? Whatever. Then Watson gets paid, and then now Mahomes got paid as well. So people are
Yeah.
like, oh, where's he gonna be at, right? And that's just a bigger question. Having to pay him more and whatever, he's worth it. I
Yeah.
just appreciate getting this headache out of the way, and I'm happy he's here. Like he is a
Me
good
too.
leader. And we talk about he is a top 10, probably in that 6 to 10 range, but sometimes he puts up like that top 5 type, weeks, and we're just like, this is like, he's
He
not
was
bad. He's a good player for sure.
he was playing like a top 5 quarterback despite us not getting the wins early on in the season. And that's like that weird part of Dak's career is that as he's become a better player, the team around him has gotten worse.
Yeah.
And he just had that like at the beginning he is that strong leader able to game manage a lot and just get a team to where they need to go. And now he's having to carry the team and he's doing well. Like the offense is scoring, but the defense is giving up so many points.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough.
It's tough sledding. And the weird thing with the Dak contract too is that not only has the market gone up, Dak's value has gone up because he's been a better quarterback the last 2 years that they haven't paid him. He's improved. And it's like we were laughing because we talked about 35 million. That's not worth it maybe back then. Now it's like if you got Dak on 35 million, that's a steal. Like, but
Yeah, and I know there are people overreacting like, that is not worth it. Oh, you're gonna hate this in a couple years. Believe me, in like 2 years, I'm gonna be paid, and Dak's deal is gonna be like looking like such a nice deal, right? You're gonna be like, wow, thank God we have Dak for 40, because like all these other quarterbacks are getting paid so much more, And like you mentioned, he's elevated his game year in year out, right? Like now he's making deeper passes. You saw 2 years ago, he was second in the league in passing yards, right behind Winston. And even last year, he was out a couple of weeks, and he was like basically leading in the top 5, in passing yards. So I'm glad we got that done.
I think he was number 2, like an extra week after he'd been out.
Yeah,
He was still in the top 2, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the biggest issue, like you mentioned, that the defense has been like total trash, and he's had to really elevate his game just to keep us in the games. But he's done his part, right? The team just needs to get it together.
Yeah, and props to him, right? He's a great guy, and he deserves his money.
Yeah.
And like as much as like as a Cowboys fan, it hurts to see us overpay for Zeke, see us overpay for Jalen Smith, for Amari Cooper, for Dak. Look, these players deserve their money, and I'm glad, especially for a running back with the way running backs are happening now. Like I'm glad to see him get paid. At least he got his money.
Right. Well, that's a whole different conversation, right? Like Dak deserves it. I would pay some quarterbacks if they're worth. Running backs, that's a whole nother matter.
It's a whole thing. It seems like nowadays running backs only get good contracts from the teams that signed them, right? Aaron Jones just did end up re-signing with the Packers, and he got a huge contract as well. I think it was like 12 a year, right? Somewhere right up there with the Zeke contract.
Right. Yeah. It's about 12, 13. But I don't know. I actually like the move. I don't know. For the organization, it's a little questionable because you wasted a second-round pick on A.J. Dillon last year. So, like, what are you doing?
Just trade him.
But
they wasted their first and second-round pick last year,
I mean, I don't know what the Packers are doing, but I think Aaron Rodgers wanted Aaron Jones back. I don't think he has a lot of wear and tear like on his body. They did split it with a couple other backs back there. So I think it's a decent deal, but like, I don't know. They also lost their center, right? Like, I feel like you should have paid your center and protected Rodgers. But hey, we'll see what happens there and what they do to do that. But, when the press conference was happening last Wednesday with the Dak signing, they also made a move that same day. They restructured 3 players' contracts: Zach Martin, Tyron Smith, and Lyle Collins, right?
Amazing.
They freed up 17 million in cap space by doing that. And that shows me like one big thing, that they really believe in Tyron Smith, that he's going to come back healthy and he's still going to be playing for a couple more years. Same with Lyle Collins, right? He came to play last year overweight, ended up missing, most of the year with an injury. But, you kind of restructured your offensive line. You freed up the space. I like the move.
Yeah, I mean, with Tyron Smith, right, when we saw him fully healthy in like 14 and in 16. I mean, he was the best tackle in the league
Yeah.
when he was fully healthy, right? Now I think he's regressed. He's probably still, when fully healthy, a top 5 tackle in the league. So it's great to see him coming back. And our offensive line falls apart when he's out. It's happened every year he's out. It just falls apart. Like, he's just that good. Zach Martin, also a top 5, guard in the league, right? Him and the other Notre Dame guard, Quinn Nelson, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
those two are just killing it, and you love to see that. So, more cap space is always great. Let us bring in more players, I don't know what's going to happen with Gallup, but maybe that means Gallup's going to sign. I don't know what'll happen, but we'll see what they're going to use that space for.
Yeah, so like when you think about it, you're like, oh, 17 million, that's great. Maybe they can sign like one of these high-end, free agents. It sounds like the Cowboys like have, put a little note with this money, like they know where it's going to go. Maybe they're signing back a couple free agents, that type of thing.
I think it's probably coming back to retaining their corners, right? Maybe we'll see them go pay for a safety. The Cowboys tend to be the week 2 spenders.
Yeah.
Like in general, you have these like week 1 spenders. The Patriots are never them, but they were definitely the week 1 spender this year.
Yeah.
But, normally you see like the Patriots, the Cowboys, like we see a lot of these week 2 spenders. They wait for the dust to settle, and then you go and get like a Randall Cobb, right? That they did a few years ago. That was a steal, right? And sometimes you see the Cowboys get these steal free agents in that second day or second week.
They don't want to overpay, which is fantastic, right? But you do reach for the fish at the bottom of the barrel, and that's going to happen this year as well. But if they really want to, because we've seen this from other playoff teams, right? They just flip the switch, they restructure all these contracts. The Saints are somehow paying a lot of people. The Bucks going all out as well, right? They're retaining all their players by just restructuring everybody.
Brady just getting paid nothing.
Yeah,
so that everyone can come back.
We literally had this conversation, we recorded it. We're just like, Shaq Barrett, their other defensive players, Chris Godwin, Levante David. That was the other one I was thinking about. Like, how are they going to retain all these players? They did though, right? They did. They already brought back Gronk as well, right? Like they're doing so many things to retain the
and
same
Shaq
team.
Barrett today, right?
Shaq Barrett.
That was one of the news around. I was like, I cannot believe they franchise tagged Godwin over Barrett. But it makes sense if they knew the Barrett contract was coming and they could get him for that money. Because Barrett signed for, I think it was like 17 a year. Like, that's nothing for what he could have signed
He
for.
definitely took a little discount to stay home and try to win another Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But the fact that Bucks could, be so flexible and make some maneuvers and stuff and do that's fantastic.
I thought there was no way he was going to go for under DeMarcus Lawrence, right? I figured that was where he's looking, and he's like, because DeMarcus Lawrence, that's another Cowboy overpay right there.
Yeah.
But when I look at the top paid, like just defensive players, DeMarcus Lawrence, I think, is in that top 10. And that's where it's like, there are so many players better than DeMarcus Lawrence that can look at that contract and say, if he can get this money, why can't I?
Right, right. Yeah. No, that's for sure. And I think D-Law's done his best. He did dip after he signed that contract.
I think he's a good player. I think he's a great player.
Yeah, the year before he signed, it was just like, whoa, this is like, top 3 defensive end. Now he's like, kind of simmered down. But I think that is a result of the rest of the defense being trash, honestly, right? Like, how much can one person do for your whole defense?
Right, and if you have no cornerbacks, teams pick the Cowboys apart on quick passes, and D-Law's not going to be able to do anything about that. Like, you're an edge rusher. What are you going to do about quick passes?
Exactly. Like, if your receivers are wide open, right? Like,
they're wide open because we don't have a quarterback. They can take a
exactly. Like, the pressure doesn't make any sense. And when it's only coming from one side, like, there's not much you can do. It's like, hey, my guard and tackle on the right side just block off D-Law. My other 3 guys can block off everybody else, right? Like, that's basically what happens. And you'd like to have some pressure. You'd like to have these lockdown, secondary. When you have neither, people are gonna be scoring like all day on you, and that's what's been happening with the Cowboys.
Right, and maybe we'll go buy a cornerback, buy a safety, something to shore up the defense. I'm sure we're probably going to end up drafting a cornerback, right, with that 10th pick.
Yeah. We'll get into that momentarily, but like real quick, if they want to sign one of these free agents right now, they could flip a couple more switches, right? Like D-Law, they could do it if they think he's gonna be here for long term. Jalen and Zeke, I'm a little hesitant about because I think those are two contracts you could move on from, like in a year or two. But you could do it if you really want to go all out. You know.
So the problem with Zeke's contract too is that no matter like the way his contract is structured, if you cut him, you're gonna have a bunch of dead money for at least 1 year.
Yeah.
Right. Because like the way his contract works is it kicks in before the cut dates. So you have to. Yeah, Zeke's contract is tough. It's really hard to get around. You're basically like if you cut him, you're gonna be stuck with his full cap hit for a year.
It's struggle bus right there.
Yeah.
I know Jalen's a little bit more flexible, but like I said, those are two you can at least maneuver and like at least pay them up front and just move it to the back or whatever. You know, add those.
Yeah, and Jalen Smith definitely an overpay, but his contract is not bad at all. Like in the long term, it's like a long-term contract, right? I think when he signed it, it was like 4 or 5 years, something like that. It's a long deal. So by the end of his deal, he's not going to be overpaid, you know?
Yeah. Right. Well, we hope.
We hope. Because the problem with just Jalen and Van Der Esch is that like when they're both healthy and both playing together, they look good, right? But Van Der Esch isn't out there often. Jalen has been nicked up. Right. And he's just not moving the way he was. I think it was 2019 2019 where he had that great year and got that payday.
Yeah.
And he's just not moving like that anymore.
It's a big issue, right? He looked really good for a year, got paid. Wow, that's just the story of NFL free agents, you know? Like players, they want to maximize off that really amazing year, right? And yeah, like we looked at those linebackers, we're like, yo, LVE is just tackling everybody. He looks really good. And we felt comfortable going into this last year. Like at least our linebackers are good, right? And they weren't, right? Like Jalen, you know, regressed quite a bit, and LVE was injured once again. You know?
And Sean Lee did his best, but you know, he's just getting up there, right? Like I think it's one of those. I think when we talk about Cowboys players over the past 10 years, Sean Lee might be the most underrated one because he has just been phenomenal when he's healthy, but he's just been unable to stay healthy. I think there was 1 year that like I was arguing he was the best linebacker in the league. I think what ended up happening, that was the year the Panthers linebacker actually won Defensive Player of the Year.
Luke Kuechly.
Yeah. And I remember that year specifically thinking like, yeah, Sean Lee is as good as Luke Kuechly. Like when he's healthy, he was tackling everybody. I think Skip Bayless called him the tackling Dutchman. Yeah. Like he just wraps up everybody that comes into his range.
No, for sure. Like he's a great leader in the locker room. You know, you can see him on the sidelines even when he's injured. He's trying to help out the team. And you're right, dude. He's a tackling monster. It's just unfortunate. Like every year he gets nicked up and misses a couple games. And I feel like the Cowboys try to match him up with some other players like Rolando McClain. They brought him back, right? And he's somewhat decent. I think it's just an issue, but like now he's really aged up there, and I don't think
he's just not quick enough to cover tight ends anymore, right? And that's where like when you're these linebackers now, if you can't cover tight ends, it becomes really tough to stay in the league.
Yeah. And one thing, you know, to look forward to during this draft time, you know, and draft time's coming up in 6 weeks. Very excited for that. But, you know, you do have a question with your wide receivers, right? Like this year, you can actually get out of Amari's contract at the end of the year and like get no hit, right? But also Michael Gallup is a free agent, right? So, you know, that is another flip you could switch, but then you're guaranteeing like Amari's money and you're keeping him for a couple more years. So that is a decision they need to make. I don't know, man. I love this Gallup, Lamb, Amari Cooper thing. I'd be okay with grabbing like another substitute for the third and you know, either trading someone or doing something about it. Because at the worst, you know, maybe Gallup signs up somewhere else next year and you'll get a comp pick for a third round pick.
Right. And I think the thing is that with the way the receiver classes have been so stacked lately, you might be able to get 80% of Gallup's value with his comp pick, right? Like because with that third round, you may be able to just get who knows, a pretty decent receiver. And we expect, look, like last year, we kind of expected Amari to be the number one, Gallup to be the two, and Lamb to be the number three. And we kind of like, even if Gallup stays, I expect that to switch and Gallup to be the number three receiver this year, right? Even if he stays. Because, Lamb just looked incredible. I assume with more time, they're going to work him into more packages. And yeah, it's just interesting too. I'm really wondering what we're going to do with our defense, especially in the draft, because Dan Quinn coming in and being the new defensive coordinator, his system is so reliant on corners and safeties, of which we have none.
Like that's the most interesting thing because he's always worked with the secondary where like they're on an island, right? They are that on that one-on-one coverage, and we're just like, yo, have you seen our players? Like we're trying to play zone out here, and we're still struggling mightily, So that'll definitely be interesting. But real quickly, like. The other piece of news that came out last week was the comp picks, right? The Cowboys getting a league high 4 picks, one of them being in the 3rd round. So they actually have 4 picks in the top 100. And I think that's fantastic, right? Having 4 picks in the first 3 rounds is what you want. Because we were talking about this pre-show, but like the 1st and 2nd round, you're getting starters, right? And with that 3rd round, you're hoping to get a starter, right? Or potential, split time, player. But, it's time to do some work, right? Like this defense needs an overhaul. Right, like there's the linebackers struggled last year, not feeling confident in them. D-Law, he's good, but like who else is on that D line, right? And the secondary, couple of free agents, like pay to move on because no one was worth it. Cornerback is definitely a big need, and the good thing is in the top 3 rounds, in the first 3 rounds, there are like a bunch of cornerbacks and safeties. So I'm hoping the Cowboys go that way.
Right, me too, and we'll see. I think there might be some other picks worth looking at depending on how things drop, right? But yeah, probably we're looking at a corner in that first pick. With there just being so many good ones, you probably get the best corner, the second best corner in the draft right there. Yeah. And then maybe a safety in the 2nd round and probably a receiver and a cornerback in the 3rd, depending on if Gallup stays, right? That's probably what we're looking at. That would probably be the ideal draft. But I don't know. It just depends. It's so hard to predict. Depends on who drops. It depends on what's available. If you want to move up, right? Maybe the Cowboys could consider trying to move up and grab that tight end, right?
Ooh. But what? How did you feel about that? I was gonna ask you that question.
I've heard this rumor, right? Like this is something that people have talked about. Cowboys fans have talked about it, right?
Yeah.
I'm personally like trade down kind of person. I would rather them trade down to 15 and just grab a corner there. Trade down even further if they can. But if someone falls to you at 10, the only thing is I don't want them taking another receiver. Like I get it. Like it'd be tempting if the Alabama receiver or that LSU receiver right drop to 10. If either of them drop to 10, it would be very tempting.
Yeah.
to take another receiver, but we really don't need it. Like we really don't need it.
Like GM me if Kyle Pitts from Florida, the tight end, falls to 10.
Oh, if he's there at 10, I'm taking him.
I'm all about that action, right? Like I know people are complaining. They're like, yo, the defense needs work. But I'm like, yo, this is like the Kelsey type tight end, right? Like this guy's gonna score a bunch of touchdowns for you. Dude, let's just have a fun offense, right? We already paid the quarterback. We already overpaid for the running back. We have the receivers. Let's just go all out. Like I'd be all about that. I get why people would be upset. So I'm okay if they don't go that way. But like you mentioned, the thing is, it'll be interesting because at the top, it's very questionable, right? There's good receivers at the top. There are a couple of good quarterbacks, right? And the cornerbacks that are there, there's no like one solidified top cornerback, right? There's like 3 in the conversation. J.C. Horn, you've got Patrick Surtain, and you've got Caleb Farley, right? So like no one really knows. Like they all have their other things. Like one's the best right now, one has the highest ceiling. Yeah. So there's different ways you can go there, but like
and that's one of those where it's like the Cowboys need to do their homework in 1, evaluating which of the 3 they want, and 2, figuring out where is the ideal position that you think those 3 are going to drop to, the one you want, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things like the Cowboys talked about, right? Seeding was top 5 on their board last year. and he dropped all the way to 17.
Yeah.
Right. So you never know who drops in the draft, right? But it's just exciting to see. We'll cover it more as the time comes closer. We get closer to the draft. But honestly, I think we do this every year. The Cowboys are looking good again, but that's pretty typical for the Cowboys, you know.
Dude, I'm drinking that Cowboys Kool-Aid. All right, I'm all in.
We started to look good at the end of the year too. It's actually really funny because the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, man, if Andy Dalton doesn't get hurt from that cheap shot, that I cannot believe there was not a suspension for that.
Right.
Like that's one of the most surprising things from that last season that they didn't see a suspension on that hit. That was a cheap shot. And then COVID, right? Like if those two things don't happen, the Cowboys do probably make the playoffs with what we were. Because I think when Andy Dalton started, I think it was 5-4 or 4-5, something like that with Andy Dalton. Like you need to get to 6-10. Like you're telling me that you need to get to 7-9 with 4-5. You would have gotten there, right?
Yeah, no. Like sitting right now with Dak, signed for the long term here for 4 years. I definitely think the Cowboys are the best team in the NFC East, right? Unless
it helps when you're in the worst division in football, right?
No, for sure. So unless Washington somehow ends up with Watson or I don't know, anyone, right? Like a really good quarterback, I think the Cowboys are still the best team in the division.
Well, because when you look at it, the division, you just look and you say, okay, we easily have the best quarterback in the division. That's not even a contest, right? No. Maybe if Washington is able to bring in a great quarterback like a Watson, or I don't know if Russell Wilson would come to Washington for the trade, but like whatever, but chances are Washington may get a good quarterback, but Dak is leagues better than Daniel Jones and Jalen Hurts, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So you have the biggest advantage there in the division. You probably, we may have the worst coach in the division though. I will say that. But across the board, if you're just looking at roster, we probably have the second or third best roster as well. I think you might say Washington is the deepest overall team right now, and then maybe the Cowboys. You could probably the Giants team is looking good, but I think they're another year away.
Yeah.
And a quarterback away from really building that roster.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And, Riverboat Ron doing great things in Washington. That defense is like, I envy it so much. Like, give me one person on the D-line, please. Like, what will it take? They are so stacked there, but, geez. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this team. And like Dev mentioned, we will talk more about these prospects and, what kind of players we can look at in the draft. But there's like a myriad of ways you can go, right? And I love it. Like, the bad thing is, historically, the Cowboys don't do what I want them to do, right? They don't take a safety in the top 2 rounds, right? And I think in the second round, you could get a good safety, and they don't usually trade back, especially with the first pick, right? But I think this is the year to do it, right? There's a potential like Trey Lance drops to 10, right? And someone could grab it. There is a potential like one of these like receivers like Jalen Waddle comes to 10, or Kyle Pitts, and you're like, hey, someone else take him. Let's move back a couple spots and give me a second round pick, right? Well, give me that extra second round pick. I'm good with that. First, just the first round swap and an extra round second, because I think that's perfect, right? When you look at the Patriots trying to help out Cam and try to win now, right? Another stud tight end, another stud receiver would make a lot of sense, right? You look someone else. There's like the Cardinals. They could use another receiver, right? The Niners at 12. If they want to potentially take one of those quarterbacks, they can move.
They could move up, right? That's what I was saying too. Like when you look at the draft order, and the Cowboys are at 10, I think there's 5 quarterbacks that you expect are worthy of top 10 picks, right? And and we've seen quarterbacks dropping the last few years, but I wonder with the Giants and 49ers, if 2 quarterbacks are available, maybe if just one is available by the time the Cowboys pick comes in, we might see someone trying to jump in front of those because if Trey Lance is there, I could see the Giants taking him, right? I could see the 49ers taking him. So we'll really have to see with one of these because, the Patriots may want to go up and get that, right?
Yeah. And they lost Joe Thuney today, right? He signed with the Chiefs, so they lost like a stud guard. So Rashawn Slater, who's an offensive tackle, the number 2 rated, he's in that range, right? Like, and if the Cowboys don't want him, someone else is going to grab him, and he's right up there with Penny Sewell, right? And he can play guard as well. So I'd be all about that. With the Cowboys, like a great offensive line, moving him in the guard position and then throwing him out at tackle when Tyron's done, I think that'd be fantastic. But like one of these other teams could move up, and there's so many good players. I'm totally down moving back to like 15, 16, 17. Like there's always going to be a player there that you're going to want, right? Because the Cowboys have so many holes to cover, right? Like defensive line. There's Christian Barmore from Alabama, defensive tackle. He is leagues better than all the rest of the defensive tackles. And he's going to be there around 15, 16, 17. So I'm down with moving back. Like I'd love that.
It's kind of ironic because I feel like teams often do the opposite of what we're saying, which is that, like, I think when you're a team with holes, you need to be moving down. And when you're a team that's, like, close, that's when you want to be moving up in the draft, right? And most of the time we see teams do the opposite. We see teams have a ton of holes and sell all their picks to go move up to get a quarterback. We see, and then they're just terrible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like, oh, this quarterback's going to be so good. They move up. They give all these, like, future first-round picks. The rest of your team's not developed, right? Like the rest of your team sucks, and now your quarterback's just going to be in this hellhole for the next 5 years.
I think the best example of that was like Washington to go get RG3, right? They had so many holes on that team. They mortgaged everything to essentially get to one playoff game. Because that was basically it, right? RG3 had one good year, and because you had no one to protect him, he gets injured, he gets hurt. And now you just wasted your second-round pick and all of those other picks.
Right. The other biggest FU was drafting Kirk Cousins the same year too, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? Like, you moved up to get RG3. Like, at least trust in the guy, right? Like, sign a free agent. Why are you drafting another quarterback? Oh, geez.
Yeah, we saw even like last year, right? That like drafting a quarterback can be terrible for some of these, especially younger quarterbacks. They just can't handle, someone else coming to sit behind them. And imagine being a rookie, you get traded up for number 2 pick, and then they still don't trust you enough. They go get another quarterback. Like, it just doesn't make sense, because what you would expect them to do is support you with the veteran, right? Like a veteran backup. That's what you want to support your young quarterbacks with.
Yeah, easily. And I think even if it's not for the full year, right? Even these number 1, number 2 picks, if the quarterbacks, let them like just learn for a couple of games. You don't need to throw them out there right on day one. And I think especially with these, you see these quarterbacks that are like in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl. Even Pat Mahomes, right? Learn from Alex Smith for a year. Tom Brady, full year, yeah, exactly. And Tom Brady obviously had Drew Bledsoe to learn from for quite a few years, So I think it is like so beneficial just to have this young person, develop and learn from these veterans for at least some amount of time.
Right. And I think that at least from what I've seen recently, it seems that quarterbacks who come in knowing they're not going to have to start week 1 tend to just be better in general. Like when they do get the start, even someone like Herbert, right? Who we expected, like we talked about, Herbert was obviously going to start before the end of the year. Like everyone knew it. The writing was on the wall. And then he gets thrown in week 2. But just it seems like going to that training camp as the backup seems to be beneficial for a lot of these quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, right? You saw him. He went into training camp as the backup and was able to, even though it was like week 3, week 4, come in and have an excellent rookie season, right?
Yeah.
And Dak even, right? Going into the first year as the backup, obviously he started all 16 games, but he came in as the backup quarterback, and he's able to learn and focus on learning instead of trying to compete right away.
Yeah, he came in as a third string quarterback.
Yeah, he came in as a third string, true. Yeah, 4th round pick, you're definitely going to be the third string quarterback. But he, in the preseason, he easily earned that backup spot.
Yeah,
Right?
that's definitely for sure. But yeah, man, so much to talk about. We'll definitely be talking more about free agency, the best moves. We'll have an episode of like the best team moves that were made, and we'll do more draft stuff. But this is fun. We obviously love the Dallas Cowboys, and we'll keep talking about them. But that wraps up this great episode. And until next time, we're out. See ya.